Hello, and thanks for joining us for Staffing Unplugged, a medical solutions podcast that delves into the world of staffing and recruitment. Each episode, we bring you insightful discussions, expert interviews, and thought provoking conversations with industry experts. I'm Kristen Dahl, your host, joined today by Rich Thompson, Chief Human Resources Officer here at Medical Solutions. Thanks for joining me today, Rich.
Hey, thanks, Kristen. Thanks for having me.
Can you start by telling us about your role at Medical Solutions?
Absolutely, as Chief HR Officer, I'm responsible for HR across the entire group, and so really, it's our role, our department's role to make sure that we are an attractive place where people want to join, that we have good people programs that enable and empower the employees to develop and grow. Also, making sure that they're rewarding and that we have a rewarding and aligned engagement programs that keep people here after they join us, and focus areas and initiatives that drive performance and accomplishments, leadership and coaching programs that enables leaders at all levels to, be empowered to make sure their teams grow and that they can, win through their teams and through themselves, and then also, create a culture, wrapped in a way that people feel aligned and rewarded and appreciated, but hopefully have fun at the same time.
And you're fairly new to the company. Can you tell us about your history and what you're passionate about?
No, listen, thanks for the question. Because I feel like I'm different than a traditional or stereotypical HR professional, in large part because I come from operations and I lean really closely to the revenue generating parts of the company, more so than technical HR. And so, luckily I have a great team that is super comprehensive that enables me to do that and kind of focus in that area. I think in large part it starts or I'm that way because of my sports history. So I played football at the University of Wisconsin, and I was a free agent with Green Bay. And so that taught me a lot of those skills that I felt like were kind of transferable to the professional environment. Once I got cut from Green Bay a long time ago, I actually wound up landing and kind of starting in the staffing and recruiting industry. So I did that about 30 years ago. Actually started on a recruiting desk, making temporary placements of an office and clerical administrative professionals in downtown Chicago. I moved up through the ranks. I went from Chicago. I changed companies, and then started out in the suburbs of Chicago as a division director. That took me to Houston, to then St. Louis, where I then moved out of the business and running finance and accounting staffing teams, and then moved over into talent management. Right, it's kind of I think that was a little bit kind of the lean to my sports background, but I just love the idea of building L&D programs and talent management programs to help align people to leaders and help drive performance that way. From there, that took me to the Zurich, where I was the global head of talent for a Deco group across the 60 different country footprint, responsible for the culture programs, the performance programs, and leadership development, and then back into the U.S. as the chief HR officer. So I say all that because I've got three different career tracks where I was out in staffing operations. I was responsible for talent management as well as CHRO. But what makes me, what I really enjoy most and what I think is kind of interesting about my background is I've been able to find a way to marry my experience with my history as well, with my experience with my history, but also with my passions. And so what I love most about this industry is that it's competitive, it's gritty, but it's also fair. Again, kind of a nod or a lean to the sports side.
And Rich, you're so passionate about culture, you actually wrote a book about it. You recently published Relentless, where you discuss ways to build a strong team culture. First of all, congratulations. That's a huge accomplishment.
Well, no, it's actually what's really interesting. I think the evolution of that, Kristen, is interesting because in one of my early roles in Zurich, or one of my early priorities in my role in Zurich, is I was tasked with creating a leadership program that helped the organization go out and identify who were the up and coming leaders and who were the existing executive leaders that were doing well. And so that gave me this opportunity of traveling across the footprint, the different global footprint, to get inside of leadership teams to identify what made people successful as leaders, right? Why did people follow them? Which is super interesting because same company, right? Same role, but different social cultures. And so I got to see what made people, what made them successful, what made them click. Why did people follow them and didn't follow the others? And the interesting thing was that I realized that often many of the characteristics that made these people successful were also the same characteristics, Kristen, of my coaching staff in football. And so all of those things that were kind of applicable, not only the professional, were also on the coaching or on the athletic side. And so that's where the book kind of evolved from. It's just this intersection between um, leadership development in a professional environment as well as coaching from an athletic environment, which is why we built the book. Um, it was a great process, and look, I love leadership, and I love the task of building teams that perform at a very high level. And there's so many parts that are important in doing so. Right there's process, there's people, but above all things, to me, it all starts with culture. Right, culture is the identity. It's the personification of a company. But it's hard because it's not the one or two things that you do from 10 to 11 on Tuesdays, right? It's and it's not the pancake breakfast or the theme Zoom calls, but culture is everything. Everything that you do all the time is the compilation of everything that you do, and it's got to be intentional, right? So it's the lens through which every employee views the company, and it gets defined whether you actively define it or not. And so that's what makes it hard, but it also makes it very interesting to me.
Yeah, very, very important topic. In healthcare staffing, and particularly with the current nursing shortage, a strong culture is key to success. So, what are some of the fundamental values you believe are essential for creating a strong culture that could apply to healthcare organizations?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, it goes back to this idea that culture is the personality, right? It's the personification of a company or a department or even a team. And so as the leader of that is you have to ask yourself, if my culture was a person, would I want to hang out with it? Right? So could I stand to go on a vacation with it? Or can I only stand having dinner with it? Or is it the kind of culture that I can only have a coffee with? Right? And as silly as that sounds, is you really have to try to figure out, you know, what is your culture, right? I mean, how does that speak to you? Is it like a good friend, right? That is aligned with you. It's trustworthy. It's honest. It's interested in you. It provides you opportunity. It's demanding, but it's also fair. But hopefully, it's rewarding and it's fun. And in the healthcare environment, it's hard, right? It's demanding. It's stressful. It's emotional, right? And in the end, we're talking about teams, and there's nothing more. A team is really nothing more than just a collection of people, right? People who have all different lives, they have different aspirations, they have different wants, they have different needs. And a strong culture empowers, enables, and encourages the individual, right, to find that connection and that path to success. So I was recently talking to actually a director of nursing and a nursing manager of a large healthcare system who commented, said, culture starts with investing in your employees, in their growth and in their development. If the people feel vested or invested in, then they feel valued. And it really comes down to that.
In your book, you seem to be talking directly to those in management and leadership roles. It seems to me, at least, that a strong culture really starts from the top. So, can you expand on the role leaders play in shaping and maintaining that positive culture?
Yeah, and it does start at the top. Is it the same examples I was talking to earlier? They gave an example of their CEO actually came to the floor again in this healthcare, came to the floor in scrubs, okay, and spent 2.5 hours shoulder to shoulder, doing whatever they needed to do, and that just builds volumes, right? Or speaks volumes of the commitment and the how essential in creating the culture, how important that is, because it trickles down. And so it all starts at the top. There's a great saying, your actions speak so loudly, I can't hear a word that you say. And that's it, right? Because you have to make sure that your leaders identify, they define, they communicate, they model, they reward, but they also protect the culture all the time, relentlessly. Where it goes wrong is that maybe the cultural identity is not as authentic to the leader's way of working, priorities, or their own personality, or maybe leaders focus too much, short term or reactive, kind of like a windsock. Everything is changing all the time. and the culture identity gets a little bit deprioritized or kind of deleted. Okay. Or even leaders just are only looking for a bullet point comment, on a marketing brochure about culture. It's that authentic, intentional, deliberate approach to identifying and modeling that culture and that behavior that's got to start to the top. Otherwise, it's just not going to have any legs.
A strong culture also factors into retention, which is a big issue for a lot of our listeners. So, can you explain how strong organizational culture directly impacts employee retention?
Yeah, great question. So important. And it really just comes down to connection, Kristen, honestly. Is we talk about that in the book, right? The power of connection and the impact on retention, but also the impact on performance. Because when an employee or a person is connected, right? There's a connection. Then that means they find meaning, right? There's purpose, right? And when there's purpose or there's meaning, there's a deeper alignment to that situation, but also there's typically a greater performance because when there's connection, people care more, right? They become more curious, they perform at a higher level, they hold themselves more accountable, they even hold each other more accountable, and they become a lot more patient, right? And some of the things that typically are annoying are not so much so when there's a connection. And lastly, they have a tendency to be a little bit less entitled. And when all of that exists, people want to stay. So you have to ask yourself is how do you connect people then to the situation? There's four connection points we talk about in the book. It's role, it's their boss or their leader, it's the team or the company. And what I mean by that is when they look at their situation, whether it's their role or the boss or their leader or their company, they feel like there is a unique connection. So much so that they can't find that somewhere else. And if they can do that, then typically they stay, right? They're saying in examples, they're saying that my boss, my leader, and I have a relationship and a camaraderie and an appreciation and a partnership that I don't feel I can find anywhere else. And therefore I am going to stay, right? And so from a leader is you have to look at that and be like, okay, so how can I drive those connections across one or many of those four? Because it's intentional and it's your job to do that. Your job, your role is to drive the connection. So you do that by discussing their goals, right? So what can you do to help them achieve them? How can you develop them in their current position, right? How can they possibly know how that they are performing and how can they advance in their, throughout their career within your system? How can you provide them with opportunities of growth? Maybe it's not even how to perform the job as much as it is. Can you provide them education and opportunities? Investing in their development keeps them from leaving almost all the time. And you'll find that if they are connected and and you are showing that you are invested in their development, that's a lot more important than any signing bonus they're going to get from anywhere else.
Those are all such great points. And you don't really think about it, but when you put it that way, it makes so much sense. So I'd like to dig a little bit deeper. As I mentioned, a lot of the hospitals that we work with have expressed issues with retention, especially coming out of the pandemic. So, in your experience, what are the most effective strategies of retaining professionals that would apply to the healthcare setting?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I've got friends and family in that space, and we're on the front lines during the pandemic. I can't imagine, all that they have gone through, and I imagine they're tired, right? Probably overworked, maybe even feel unappreciated, and it's retaining people in healthcare can be really tricky because there are a lot of different options and there are a lot of different incentives for nurses and for staff to actually leave, right? Because they are in demand. But I go back to that fact of these teams again are people, right? Teams are a collection of individuals who have different wants and they have different needs, and they potentially have a different definition of success. And so, as a leader, you need to know all of this about every individual in your team. I mean, it's really important that you are 100% aligned, understanding, and clear on what is the role and what is your expectation of them as your leader in the role. How are they doing in real time all the time, right? and 2 to 3 things that they need to work on in order to improve their performance year over year. By giving them a path that is clear, it's not ambiguous, or it's not unknown, can be very, very important. And that's where I find that retention starts to wane, is if I'm in a situation where I don't feel like I'm clear on what role I'm supposed to do. And you could say, listen, if I'm a nurse, everybody knows what the nurse role is, but that's not necessarily true all the time, because there are different components to performance. You got to be clear. But if it's ambiguous on what's the role, what are the expectations, but more importantly of how am I performing them, and how do I need to get better, that just becomes, really, kind of a disconnection, and people start to get a bit of a wondering eye. So it's the understanding of kind of where I am and where can I go, as well as driving those connections that I talked about earlier, that are really, really important for every leader to have for all of their key people.
Now, when it comes to a lot of what we've discussed so far, leaders, and especially those at the top, usually want to know if these strategies and initiatives are actually working. So, when we're talking about overall culture, do you have any recommendations on how healthcare organizations can measure the success of their culture or identify those areas that may need to be improved?
Well, it's important, and so first of all, you need to really care about that, right? I mean, you need to, you can engage in a lot of different ways, but you need to do something with it. It's more than just kind of running a survey and kind of collecting information. I mean, communication is really, really important, and communication is two-way, right? So communication isn't just me talking to people, but it's me having a conversation as an organization to understand what people are experiencing and what is important to them. I mean, where it goes wrong is if, when you're doing a survey, as an example, is if you are only, I've seen examples of companies where they will only survey small pockets of people that will only give them good scores. I mean, look, come on, that doesn't do anything, because it's not full representation of the organization. Where it also can go wrong is when you do a survey or you're collecting information, whether it's through a focus group or whatever, is if you're not, communicating the results, right? Sometimes the results are kind of tough. I mean, maybe they're not so nice, but it's okay as an organization to stand up and say, listen, we've heard you. Here's what we've heard. Okay. And you got to kind of own up to it. That's that trustworthiness that I think is important. Another mistake I think is made off of results is that they're not validated, because sometimes the wording in the surveys are a little bit tricky, right? They can kind of be interpreted multiple ways. So I have found, as a good practice is when we get feedback, is we take that back to the population, even if it's a small group, to say, here's what that feedback is. Tell us what you think that means, so that we're ensuring that we're closely aligned. But lastly, which is probably most important, is you got to action to it, right? So commit to, this is what I've heard, this is what we validated, and now these are the actions to try to go make change in that space, just so they know that they've been heard. You can gather that information off of surveys, you can grab them off of Glassdoor reviews, comments, and in exit stays. If you guys do stay interviews, or exit interviews, sorry, and stay interviews. Um, but promotion rates, internal retention rates, I mean, those are all things that are telling you that you're doing the right thing.
Perfect. That's a great answer. Well, Rich, we've covered a lot of great information today, but before we leave today, I wanted to ask you one more question. If you would like our listeners to remember one key message or piece of advice, what's the main thing you'd like them to remember or take away?
No, it's great. And listen, I'm going to go back to where we started, right? Which is that I am even though it's been a little while, is that athletic lean to me, right? So it's about grit, it's about competing, but it's always about winning. And no matter what you're doing, is can you win? Can you win as an employee? Can you win as a leader? And to be a champion leader is the relentless pursuit of what matters. And in my opinion, what matters is being courageous, driving connections, communicate transparently, be a people developer who coaches, and always be consistent. Because if you prioritize those things, you're not only able to drive success of your organization, but you're creating a lasting impact on those who are in it.
Great advice. Thank you, Rich. And thank you so much for joining us and sharing such thoughtful insights with us.
It's good to see you. Thanks, Kristen.
Absolutely. And thank you to our listeners. Please join us every month as we unravel the complexities of healthcare staffing and recruitment, sharing expert insights and actionable advice that can help you with your recruitment efforts. In the meantime, visit our website, medicalsolutions.com, for more information on our healthcare talent ecosystem and how we can help your facility reach its full potential. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.